You know how today you can see a video of someone saying something just completely outrageous, and your very first thought is, wait, is this a deep fake?
Oh, absolutely. It's like a daily occurrence now.
Right. We live in this constant, exhausting state of having to verify reality. We have to trace the origin of an image or a quote just to make sure we aren't being manipulated by some algorithm.
Or a bad actor, yeah. It is, I mean, it's the defining anxiety of the information age. We are totally surrounded by data, but we're basically starved for verifiable truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So imagine experiencing that exact same anxiety, that exact same crisis of truth, but almost 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, without the internet to help you sort it out.
Without anything. That is the chaotic world of a 2nd century bishop named St.Irenaeus of Lyon. And today we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of sources about him.
A very diverse stack, too.
Definitely. We're looking at encyclopedias, historical wikis, and theological articles from Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant perspectives. We are exploring how this one guy, living between roughly 130 and 202 AD, essentially built the original firewall against misinformation.
He really did. He defined early Christian orthodoxy during a time of just absolute ideological chaos.
He did. And we need to clarify our approach right at the start here.
Yeah, that's important because when you read through these sources, you immediately see that modern traditions interpret Irenaeus through their own distinct theological lenses.
Right. Everybody wants to claim him.
Exactly. They all point to him as a foundational architect of their specific beliefs. So our objective in this deep dive isn't to validate one specific modern interpretation over another. We're just going to impartially explore the history and the concepts exactly as they are presented in the text.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're just flooded with conflicting information. You've got dozens of different splinter groups all claiming to possess the ultimate hidden truth about the universe.
It sounds like social media.
It really does. You might think information overload is this modern internet problem, but that was the daily reality for Christians in the 2nd century. It was an incredibly volatile marketplace of ideas.
And to understand the sheer scale of the confusion, you really have to look at the timeline.
Okay.
By the middle of the 2nd century, the original apostles were gone.
Right. They had all passed away.
Yeah, the eyewitnesses to Jesus were dead. And in that vacuum, countless factions just started popping up all across the Roman Empire.
Just claiming whatever they wanted.
Pretty much. We started handing out these newly written texts claiming, Jesus actually taught this secret doctrine to James. Or Jesus didn't actually have a physical body. It was just an illusion.
Wow. So if you were an everyday person in, say, the year 150 AD, trying to follow this faith, you were flying blind.
Completely blind. You had no centralized authority to consult.
You couldn't just Google, did Jesus actually say this? So to understand how anyone could definitively prove what was true 150 years after the fact, we first have to look at Irenaeus' background.
His resume, essentially.
Right, his physical connection to the origins of the movement. So he was born in Smyrna, which is in modern-day Turkey, and crucially, he wasn't like an adult convert discovering the faith later in life.
No, he grew up fully embedded in a Christian family.
Which matters, right?
That environmental detail is vital because of who was actually leading the church in Smyrna during his formative years. Irenaeus was directly discipled by Saint Polycarp.
And Polycarp is a huge name.
Massive. Because Polycarp, in turn, had been directly discipled by St. John the Apostle.
The actual Apostle John, like one of the 12.
The very same. So we are talking about an incredibly short, highly verifiable chain of human connection here.
That's just 2 degrees of separation from the origin point. That proximity gives him immense credibility. But he doesn't stay in Smyrna, right?
No, he ends up moving to Lugdunum in Gaul, which is modern-day Lyon in France.
Right. And he's serving as a priest under Bishop of Lyon. But then the trajectory of his life just completely fractures around 177 AD.
Yeah, things take a very dark turn.
Right. So the Christian community in Gaul sends Irenaeus on this diplomatic mission to Rome. He's carrying a letter for Pope Eleutherius regarding a controversy over a movement called Montanism.
And we should definitely pause on Montanism for a second because it sets the stage for his entire worldview.
Go for it.
The Montanists were a charismatic movement, and they claimed that they were receiving new direct prophecies from the Holy Spirit.
Which, I mean, sounds spiritually exciting, maybe.
Sure, until you hear the dangerous part. They claimed these fresh revelations actually superseded the teachings of the original apostles.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a problem.
It's a huge problem. If that idea took root, it threatened to plunge the entire church into just subjective chaos, where literally any new prophet could overwrite the foundational texts.
Okay, so Irenaeus travels to Rome to consult on this crisis of authority. But that diplomatic road trip providentially saves his life.
It does. It's wild timing.
Because while he's away in Rome, this brutal, systematic persecution breaks out back home in Gaul under the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
And the historical records we have on this are just harrowing.
They are. 42 Christians were tortured and martyred, and that included his mentor, the 90-year-old Bishop of Lyon.
Just devastating. And, the psychological resilience required for what happens next is staggering.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. He returns to this traumatized, decimated community. They've lost their leaders, their friends, their sense of security.
And they immediately turn around and select him to be their new bishop.
Right. He steps into leadership over a grieving flock in a completely hostile empire, and he really embodies his name during this time.
Which is fitting because Irenaeus literally means the peaceable one.
Right. He wasn't just some academic writing treatises in an ivory tower somewhere. He was a survivor who was actively forging unity.
And he proved that peacemaker reputation later in life, too. The sources note he actually intervened to stop Pope Victor Haliv from excommunicating entire communities in Asia Minor.
This was over the Quartodeciman controversy, right?
Yeah, which was, if you boil it down, essentially a massive dispute over the proper calendar date to celebrate Easter.
Right. Victor wanted absolute uniformity.
He did, but Irenaeus stepped in and argued that breaking global unity over a calendar date was just a complete betrayal of the gospel. He had this unparalleled ability to differentiate between secondary traditions, like a date on a calendar, and primary non-negotiable truth.
Okay, so if we pull back and look at his resume, Irenaeus represents a sort of theological chain of title. Like, in real estate, when you buy a house, you run a title search.
Right, to prove an unbroken line of ownership.
Exactly. All the way back to the original land grant, just to ensure no fraudulent claims exist.
Mm-hmm.
In a world full of theological squatters making up rumors, Irenaeus offered a verified, unhackable chain of custody. Jesus to John, John to Polycarp, Polycarp to Irenaeus.
I love that analogy. It was basically a public ledger of truth.
Right, a theological blockchain.
Exactly. A chain of custody is a highly precise way to conceptualize it. It relies on identifiable historical figures passing a tangible deposit from one generation to the next.
And that verified chain became his primary weapon against the biggest existential threat to the early church.
Right, because there were groups claiming they had their own secret chain of custody.
The Gnostics.
Yes. Specifically the Valentinian Gnostics. They are the primary antagonists in Irenaeus' masterwork, which is this massive 5-volume treatise called Against Heresies.
And reading through our sources on the Gnostics, it really sounds like a complex sci-fi mythology.
It is deeply weird to modern ears, yeah.
They believed that the physical, material world was inherently corrupted and evil. They taught that the physical universe was created by this tragic cosmic accident, orchestrated by a foolish lesser deity they called the Demiurge.
And just to be clear, they explicitly identified this foolish Demiurge as the god of the Old Testament.
Which is wild. So in their system, the ultimate transcendent spiritual god would never contaminate himself with dirt or flesh or matter.
Exactly. Therefore, they taught that Jesus wasn't actually a physical human being who suffered and bled and died.
He just appeared to be human.
Right, like a hologram.
Yeah.
Jesus was a purely spiritual entity, and his mission wasn't to redeem the world. His mission was to deliver secret knowledge gnosis in Greek to a select few elites.
So this secret knowledge acted as a cosmic passcode, allowing these enlightened few to just escape their evil physical bodies and return to the pure spiritual realm.
That's the goal. Total escape from the physical.
Now, I have to admit, reading this, I actually kind of sympathize with the Gnostics on some level.
Really? How so?
Well, when you consider the brutal reality of the ancient world, you've got plagues, famine, infant mortality, the constant threat of violent execution, the idea that the physical world is just a flawed prison and we need to intellectually escape. It feels like a very rational, understandable philosophical response.
Yeah. Oh, sure. It is a highly seductive philosophy precisely because it offers an escape hatch from suffering.
Right. So why was Irenaeus so deeply opposed to this? Why fight a group of intellectuals trying to philosophize their way out of a hard life?
Because Irenaeus saw the profound arrogance and elitism embedded at the very core of that escape hatch. The Gnostics didn't just divide the cosmos into spirit and matter, they divided humanity into rigid, inescapable castes.
Like a class system.
Exactly. They taught there were material people who were essentially animals lacking a soul, just doomed to annihilation.
Yikes.
Then there were psychic people, everyday believers who could maybe achieve a lesser state of salvation through rigorous discipline. And finally, the spiritual elites, the Gnostics themselves.
Let me guess. They were inherently guaranteed salvation.
Of course, because they possessed the secret code.
That is incredibly dark. It's the ultimate exclusive country club where the vast majority of humanity is just structurally barred from entry.
Right, and that is why Irenaeus fought with such ferocity. He was fighting for the democratization of salvation. He argued that God's truth wasn't some cryptic puzzle designed only for wealthy, educated elites who had the leisure time to sit around and ponder cosmic mysteries.
The truth was public.
Exactly, freely available to the poorest, most uneducated peasant in the empire. And, crucially, it was grounded in the absolute goodness of the physical world.
Because God intentionally created matter.
Yes, God intended to redeem it, not abandon it.
So how did he functionally fight this battle? I mean, we were talking about an era before printing presses, before centralized communications. He couldn't just tweet out a thread debunking them.
No, he couldn't. He combated them by heavily championing the public physical scriptures. He is actually the earliest surviving historical witness to mandate what we now call the fourfold gospel.
Right. He argued forcefully that there must be exactly 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Just as there are 4 zones of the world and 4 principal winds, according to his analogy in the sources.
So he wasn't just curating a reading list. He was arguing that these 4 public texts are as structural and undeniable to reality as the points on a compass.
Exactly. But the true brilliance of his strategy was how he weaponized transparency. Against Heresies wasn't just a dry theological essay, it was an exhaustive field manual.
Like an intelligence dossier.
Yes. He meticulously documented the bizarre, secret rituals and complex mythologies of the Gnostics, literally dragging their hidden doctrines out into the light of day.
And pastors across the empire copied this text by hand and used it to identify and dismantle Gnostic rhetoric spreading in their own congregations.
It was incredibly effective.
And what's amazing is that modern archaeology actually proved how accurate his intelligence gathering was.
Oh, the Nag Hammadi discovery.
Yes. For centuries, modern historians suspected Irenaeus was just exaggerating the absurdity of Gnostic beliefs, to make his opponents look foolish. But then, in 1945, this massive cache of original Gnostic texts was discovered buried in jars in the Egyptian desert.
The Nag Hammadi Library.
Right. And scholars translated these texts and realized, wait, Irenaeus was incredibly accurate. He hadn't fabricated a single detail, he had merely exposed them.
He completely dismantled their system by exposing its internal contradictions. But, as he established the 4 public gospels and defended the goodness of the physical world, he ran into a massive logistical hurdle.
Which was?
The Gnostics weren't just throwing away the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were actually reading those exact same 4 texts.
Oh, interesting. So they used the same books.
Exactly. But they were applying their secret allegorical decoder ring to the passages, twisting the words to support their weird caste system.
Ah, which forces Irenaeus to solve the next logical puzzle. If everyone is holding the exact same book, who actually has the authority to interpret the text correctly?
Right, and this is the crucible where Irenaeus forges the concepts of the public rule of faith and apostolic succession.
Okay, lay that out for us.
He argued that the apostles didn't whisper secret passwords into the ears of a favored few in some dark room. They deposited the truth into the public institutions of the church openly. The analogy he used was brilliant. He compared it to a rich man depositing a vast sum of money into a public bank.
The funds are secure, but anyone who genuinely desires the truth can just walk right into the bank and draw from it.
Exactly.
And to prove this unbroken chain of authority, he doesn't point to abstract philosophical concepts. He points to visible historical people. He specifically highlighted the Church of Rome, noting it was founded by Peter and Paul.
He stated Rome possessed preeminent authority.
Right, and he literally wrote down the unbroken sequential list of the first 13 popes, starting from Peter and running all the way down to Eleutherus, who was the bishop sitting in Rome during Irenaeus' own lifetime.
And we really need to point out this specific mechanism, the appeal to Rome and the reliance on an unbroken lineage of bishops, this is the exact friction point where our modern sources diverge pretty dramatically.
We absolutely have to explore how these different traditions claim him today, because it really highlights how complex his legacy is. Let's look at the Catholic sources first.
Right. Catholic scholars view his writings as foundational, indisputable proof of the papacy, the absolute necessity of apostolic succession, and the Church's infallible teaching authority.
They look at Irenaeus outlining the Roman succession and argue, look, the early church was structurally and functionally Catholic.
Exactly. But Eastern Orthodox sources interpret his legacy through a very different lens.
How so?
They focus heavily on his role as a consensus builder. They point back to his intervention with Pope Victor over the Easter calendar as evidence that, yeah, while the Bishop of Rome held deep respect, the global church was ultimately governed by a consensus of bishops, not a single monarchical authority.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, the Orthodox tradition draws immense inspiration from his early Trinitarian language. Long before the Council of Nicaea formulated strict theological definitions, Irenaeus described the Son and the Holy Spirit as the two hands of Nod.
Well, I like that phrasing.
It's beautiful. He saw them actively and intimately working together to mold creation.
Okay, and then the Protestant sources enter the conversation with, I would say, a nuanced appreciation and a pretty distinct warning.
Yes, they do.
They celebrate his fierce defense of the unity of Scripture, applauding his argument that the Old and New Testaments tell one cohesive story of redemption, rather than depicting two different gods like the Gnostics claimed.
But they also look closely at his blistering critique of heretics who preach themselves.
Right, the ones who fracture the church just to stroke their own intellectual vanity. Protestant scholars view this as a deeply sobering mirror held up to modern Protestantism, which has, over the centuries, splintered into thousands of separate denominations based on individual interpretations of the text.
It's a challenging mirror for sure.
Now, here is where I have to push back on Irenaeus' entire structural premise, though. This is getting really interesting, but also risky.
Okay, what's the risk?
He places an immense amount of weight on these bishops. But what if the human leaders in that unbroken chain fail? What if a bishop in that lineage turns out to be deeply corrupt or starts teaching profound error? Does Irenaeus honestly expect everyday believers to just blindly trust whoever happens to be sitting in the bishop's chair?
It's a great question, and it is the most critical vulnerability in his system. But the text revealed that Irenaeus was remarkably clear-eyed about the reality of human sin.
He wasn't naive about it.
Not at all. He doesn't idolize the bishops. He explicitly warns his readers against leaders who, in his words, serve their own lusts and who are puffed up with pride.
Oh, okay, so he acknowledges bad apples exist.
He absolutely does. He acknowledges that if a bishop falls away from the truth, it brings the direst calamity upon the community. But, and this is key, he argues that the systemic, public continuity of the global, interconnected church safeguards the truth far better than any isolated, self-appointed guru could.
Got it. So the system of succession acts as a structural guardrail, not a guarantee of individual moral perfection for every single bishop.
Precisely. If a single bishop strays into error, the surrounding bishops who all share the exact same public deposit of truth can correct or remove him. It is a system of checks and balances rooted in physical community.
And that transition from abstract philosophy to physical reality, that is the defining heartbeat of his theology. His defense of the physical church and the physical scriptures was entirely rooted in his magnificent theology of the physical human body.
Yes. Specifically, what Jesus Christ actually accomplished in human flesh. This is universally recognized by the sources as his greatest theological triumph.
The recapitulation theory.
Right, recapitulation. The term originates from the Greek word anakephileosastai, which means to sum up or to gather everything together from the beginning.
And the way he articulates this is just breathtaking. He frames Christ as the new Adam and Mary as the new Eve. The sources continually highlight his most famous phrasing regarding this symmetry. He wrote, "The knot of Eve's disobedience was untied by Mary's obedience."
It's incredible poetry. He views the history of salvation as a process of meticulous reversal. Christ undoes the fall of humanity by deliberately tracing over the lines of the original failure and just getting it right.
So the original disobedience occurred at a tree in the Garden of Eden.
Exactly. Therefore, that catastrophe had to be reversed by Christ's perfect obedience on the wood of a tree, the cross. Adam failed as the representative head of humanity, plunging the whole human race into ruin. So Christ becomes the new head of humanity, gathering up the broken pieces and restoring them.
To put it in modern technical terms, it is exactly like debugging a massively complex computer program.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Because the original human code was corrupted by a fatal virus back in Eden. The system was crashing.
Yeah.
So Christ, the original programmer, physically inserts himself into the software environment. He doesn't just delete the program, he goes back to the corrupted code, line by line, executing the commands perfectly.
That debugging analogy captures his specific emphasis on the stages of life perfectly. Because Irenaeus took this idea of Christ redoing human life incredibly seriously.
He didn't just pop in as an adult.
Right. He argued that Christ had to sanctify every single stage of human development by actually physically living through it. He had to be an infant to redeem infancy. He had to be a teenager to redeem youth.
The sources even note that Irenaeus argued, relying on a specific reading of John 8:57, that Jesus must have lived into his 40s or 50s.
Yeah, he was adamant about that.
Because if he never experienced old age, how could he redeem the experience of aging? It shows a radical commitment to the incarnation. God didn't just, borrow a human suit for a quick weekend rescue mission. He embedded himself into the full spectrum of the human condition.
He lived it all. And once again, different traditions draw distinct inspiration from this today.
Let's hear it.
Orthodox sources view this recapitulation as the bedrock of theosis, or divinization. This is the profound concept that Christ became what we are in order to make us what he is. Right. He didn't merely die to pay a legal debt. He physically infected human nature with his own divine immortality, essentially curing the disease of death from the inside out.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. Conversely, Protestant and Reformed sources, like the article from Credo magazine in our stack, they connect recapitulation directly to the doctrine of Christ's active obedience.
Which is a bit different.
Yeah, this is the theological concept that Christ saves humanity not just passively, by absorbing the punishment on the cross, but actively by living a perfectly righteous, law-keeping life on our behalf. He secures a perfect record that is then credited to the believer.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we synthesize all of these monumental ideas, his fight against the elitism of the Gnostics, his insistence on a verifiable apostolic succession, and his sweeping vision of recapitulation, we see a breathtakingly cohesive worldview.
We really do.
Irenaeus saved early Christianity from dissolving into a million fractured mystery cults by anchoring it violently to physical reality.
Real history, visible leaders, public texts.
Exactly. And a God who refused to abandon the dirt, but who physically entered the material world to redeem the totality of human experience.
Which brings us to what is arguably his most famous, most fiercely quoted statement. He wrote, "The glory of God is a human being fully alive, and the life of man consists in beholding God."
It is an absolute demolition of the Gnostic impulse. He's saying you do not have to escape your body or hate the material world or flee your ordinary life to please the divine.
Right. So for you listening right now, Irenaeus serves as a brilliant reminder that true knowledge and true spirituality are never about finding some secret elite club that makes you feel intellectually superior to the masses. It is about grounding yourself in a public truth that makes you vibrantly, fully alive right where you are in the physical world.
Because we really are navigating an era that mirrors the 2nd century in deeply unsettling ways.
We are.
We're drowning in a sea of unverified information. We're profoundly suspicious of institutions. And we have developed a cultural obsession with isolating ourselves just to discover, our own personal truth.
So we're going to leave you with this lingering thought to explore on your own. The early church survived its most chaotic, vulnerable era, not by encouraging individuals to retreat inward and find secret enlightenment in isolation. They survived by clinging fiercely to a shared, public, and intensely physical community. What does that historical reality say about our modern instinct to try and figure out the universe all by ourselves? In a world saturated with digital deepfakes and endless subjective realities, perhaps the only genuine way to verify the truth is to look at the chain of custody and lean on the physical people standing right beside you.